The three secret rear gears that made small blocks feel like big blocks. Muscle car history is a lie. We have been programmed to believe that displacement was king, that the 454 LS6 or 426 Hemi were the only path to dominance. But the brutal truth is that cubic inches were often just a smokescreen. The real weapon was not under the hood, but hidden deep in the rear differential.
At the 454
While insurance
LS6.
actuaries hunted down big blocks with punitive surcharges, cunning dealers like Mr. Norm and Don Yenko exploited a mechanical loophole to cheat the system. 3 magic ratios, 391, 410, and 456. This is the unvarnished story of how mechanical leverage allowed a high-revving Z28302 to generate more violent wheel torque than a lazy 396, effectively breaking the laws of physics on the street. Forget the brochure horsepower. Let's uncover the math Detroit did not want you to see. If you're a true gearhead who values engineering over hype, hit that like button. Share this with your crew and tell us your own gearing war stories in the comments below. Thomas. To understand the genius of the gear swap, you must first confront the factory trap of the late 1960s. Walking into a dealership in 1968 to order a Camaro S350 or a Mustang GT did not guarantee a race car for you. Were actually purchasing a corporate compromise. Detroit engineers were handcuffed by mandates for highway comfort and fuel economy, forcing them to shackle these high-performance engines to tall rear axle ratios like 273:1 or 308:1. This mechanical paralysis created a phenomenon known on the street as the bog. A high-revving small block like the Chevy 302 or Moper 340 generates its power high in the rev range, usually above 4,000 RPM. However, a 308 gear forces the engine to languish at a sleepy 2,200 RPM at cruising speed. When the light turned green, that 3,500 pounds chassis was not being pushed by peak horsepower, but was instead being dragged by a torque deficit. The engine had to fight the car's own gearing just to reach its power band. Detroit initially solved this problem with a lazy application of brute force known as the big block. Rather than optimizing the drivetrain, they simply dropped in massive 440s and 454s. That produced over 400 pounds-feet of torque right off idle. This sheer displacement masked the inefficiency of the 308 gears effectively, but it was a crude fix. The bill for this excess came due in 1969 when the insurance actuaries rewrote the risk tables. These financial analysts examined the carnage of high horsepower accidents and slapped a performance surcharge of up to 300% on high-displacement vehicles. Owning a 426 Hemi or 454, Chevelle suddenly transformed from a dangerous hobby into financial suicide for anyone under 25. This crackdown inadvertently created the perfect storm for the small block. The street demanded a car that could slip under the insurance radar as an economy coupe yet still hit like a heavyweight. The solution was found not in more cubic inches, but in the aggressive mechanical leverage of the 410 gear. To see through the illusion of displacement, we must abandon the marketing brochures and embrace the cold, hard physics of the torque multiplier. The rear differential is not merely a passive connector. It is a variable lever that can magnify force. And this is where the mathematical cheat occurs. We can prove this by staging a direct forensic comparison between two icons of 1969 using the very formulas that Detroit engineers understood but sales departments ignored. Consider the standard bearer of brute force. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Nostalgia Rides for more legendary cars. A 1969 Chevelle S396 equipped with the L35 engine. On paper, it is a monster, generating a factory-rated 410 pounds-feet of torque. However, when shackled to a standard TH400 automatic transmission and a highway-friendly 307 rear axle, the math reveals a disappointing reality. By multiplying the engine torque, the transmission first gear ratio of 248, and the rear axle ratio, we find that the Chevelle puts approximately 3,121 pound-feet of torque to the pavement. That is the baseline for big block power. Now contrast that with the supposed underdog, a Z28 Camaro running the small 302 engine. While the factory underrated this engine at 290 pounds-feet for insurance purposes, dyno tests revealed the truth was closer to 350 pound-feet when tuned. When this engine is paired with a Muni M21 close ratio gearbox and the nuclear option 456 rear gears, the equation changes entirely. Multiplying the 350 pounds-feet by the 221st gear and that massive 456 axle ratio yields a staggering 3,511 pounds-feet of wheel torque. The conclusion is mathematically shocking. The small block, despite giving away nearly 100 cubic in of displacement, is physically transmitting 12% more force to the tires than the big block in first gear. But static leverage is only half the weapon. The other half is the phenomenon of RPM rise. The 302 uses an oversquare, designed with a large bore and a short 30-inch stroke, resulting in lightweight pistons that carry far less inertial mass than the heavy, reciprocating assembly of a 396 deep 456 gears exploit. This by allowing the engine to flash through the rev range instantly. While the big block is still laboring to overcome its own internal weight and tall gearing, the small block has already sprinted into its power peak, utilizing the mechanical advantage to accelerate the engine speed faster than the car itself. While Chevrolet and Ford experimented with various ratios, the Moperkamp, Dodge, and Plymouth found their ultimate weapon in the 391-to-1 gear set. This ratio became the calling card of the Abode platform, specifically the Plymouth Duster 340 and the Dodge Dart Swinger, turning these lightweight compacts into giant slayers. The necessity for this gear arose from the architecture of the 340 in V8 itself. Unlike the massive 440RB engine, which produced torque like a diesel truck, the 340 was a short-stroke, high-winding athlete that lacked significant low-end grunt. When paired with standard 323 gears, the 340 would often bog off the line, waiting for the RPM decline before it could truly fight. The man who solved this equation was the legendary Mr. Norm Krause of Grand Spalding Dodge in Chicago. Mr. Norm understood that selling performance in the insurance-hostile environment of the early 1970s required subterfuge. He championed the performance axle package, coded a 31 or a 36 on the order sheet, which quietly installed the aggressive 391 gears at the factory or the dealership. This created the perfect insurance loophole. When an actuary looked at a Dodge Demon GSS, they saw a small displacement compact car that was fully insurable. They did not see the 391 ring and pinion hidden inside the axle, housing a modification that was invisible to the naked eye, but devastating on the asphalt. The impact of this single mechanical change was profound. In period testing, a standard Duster 340 with 323 gears would leisurely cover the quarter mile in about 14.7 seconds, a respectable but beatable time. However, checking the box for the 391 ratio transformed the car's personality entirely, dropping elapsed times into the low 14-second range and allowing it to run door-to-door with big block Plymouth Roadrunners that cost twice as much to insure. The 391 became the definitive Street Fighter ratio because it hit the mechanical sweet spot. Aggressive enough to launch hard at a stoplight, yet forgiving enough to drive to work without blowing up the engine on the highway. If the 391 gear was a street brawler, the 410-to-1 ratio was a psychopath. This gear set did not care about your fuel economy or your hearing. It existed for one purpose, only to weaponize the high RPM nature of Chevrolet's most misunderstood engine. To understand why the 410 was mandatory, we must look at the birth of the 302Z28. This engine was not built for the street. It was a purebred race motor engineered specifically to exploit a loophole in the Sika Trans M series rules, which limited displacement to 305 cubic in. GM engineers created this Frankenstein monster by taking the 4-in bore block of a 327 and stuffing it with the short 3-in stroke crankshaft of a 283. The result was an oversquare engine that could scream to 8,000 RPM, but was virtually dead on arrival below 3,000 RPM. On the street, AZ28 with standard gears was a tragedy. At a traffic light, if you dumped the clutch at idle, the engine would bog and die. It simply lacked the leverage to move the car. This is where the 410 gear became the savior. By installing a 410 rear end, the engine was forced to spin at nearly 3,500 RPM, just to maintain 60 miles per hour. It meant the engine was always on the boil, simmering right at the edge of its power band. When you stopped the gas, there was no waiting. The 410 gear allowed the 302 to bypass its weak low end entirely and instantly scream into its violent upper register. This philosophy was perfected by Don Yenko, the famous Pennsylvania dealer who had made his name selling 427 Camaros. By 1970, with insurance agents hunting down big blocks, Yenko realized the 427 was becoming unsellable to his young clientele. His solution was the Yenko Deuce Nova. He used the central office production order system to equip lightweight Novas with the high-output LT1350 small block. Crucially, Yenko insisted these cars come equipped with the 410 rear axle. The genius of the Yenko Deuce was that it looked harmless on an insurance application. Just a compact car with a small block V8, but on the street, that 410 gear multiplied the LT1 torque so aggressively that it could jump a car length ahead of a big block shovel before the larger engine could even take a deep breath. Yenko had not just built a car. He had built a loophole that ran 13/4 miles. If 410 was a modification, the 456-to-1 ratio was a manifesto. Choosing this gear set was effectively signing a contract that declared, you no longer cared about highway cruise and fuel economy or your own sanity. It was the nuclear option transforming a streetcar into a localized weapon that rendered first gear practically useless for anything other than tire smoke. At 55 miles per hour, your engine would be screaming at 4,000 RPM, a deafening reminder that you had sacrificed comfort for violence. Dealers like Baldwin Motion understood this trade-off implicitly. When Joel Rosen offered his famous money-back guarantee, promising his Phase 3 Camaros would run 1,150 seconds or he would buy them back, was not just betting on the engine, he was betting on the dealer-installed 456 or 488 gears that ensured the car launched hard enough to break the laws of physics even if it made the drive home miserable. This philosophy of gearing over grunt was scientifically validated by Bill Grumpy Jenkins in 1972, facing the overwhelming displacement of Hemi engines in product. Jenkins realized he could not outmuscle them, so he outrevved them. His Grumpy's Toy 10 Vega used a lightweight chassis and ultra-deep gears to keep his small block singing at 9,000 RPM, proving that a screaming mouse could kill a lazy elephant. But the most surgical application of this nuclear logic on the street belonged to Tommy Burkhart. In a now legendary mismatch, Burkhart's 340 horsepower Dodge Charger faced off against a lighter, more aerodynamic Chevrolet Corvette L82. The Corvette should have won, but it was fatally flawed by its civilized 336 factory gears, which left it lethargic in the mid-range. Burkhart, ignoring top speed entirely, installed a 444 ratio. He calculated that street races were not decided at 140 mph, they were won in the brutal sprint from 40 to 80 mph, while the Corvette was still waiting for its power band. Burkhart's gearing multiplied his torque to nearly 2,800 pound-feet at the wheels, instantly ending the race before it truly began. He proved that in the real world, the nuclear option was not about how fast you could go. It was about how fast you could get there. The golden age of muscle did not end with a bang. It ended with the whimper of smog pumps and catalytic converters. Yet, as the 1970s emissions crackdown strangled the mighty big blocks into extinction, the small blocks survived. Why? Because while you can outlaw compression ratios, you cannot outlaw physics. A smart mechanic could always wake up a choked engine with the right leverage. History has left us with one brutal truth. Horsepower is vanity. Torque multiplication is sanity. The legends of the stoplight were not written by the checkbook racers who bought the biggest engines. They were written by the thinkers who understood the math. So the next time you see a vintage Survivor, do not just stare at the displacement badge on the hood. Look underneath at the rear axle. That is where the smart money beat the big money. That is where David did not just fight Goliath. He left him in the dust. Now it is your turn. Are you running a highway cruiser or a stoplight terror? Drop your gear ratio in the comments below. And if you learned something new today, hit that like button and share this video with a fellow gearhead.